What is the right way to build a defense when the model that can break protected systems can also show us how to fix them? OpenAI says it suspended Astra after the unreleased model crossed its top cyber threshold. That pause protects OpenAI more than it protects anyone else. This is the first time the defender's job is getting easier than the attacker's. Finding every hole used to be impossible, but now we're approaching the ability to do that at machine speed. So here's the claim I'll stand behind. Keeping that ability and the decision to pause it inside one building and under one company is the real risk. Nobody attacking you is waiting for OpenAI's permission. That's today's lead. Also in today's episode, lab-borne viruses that walked past an old screen, a web rewiring itself for visitors with no eyes, 3 towns asking who carries the build-out, and a treatment meant to actually end depression systems. Come with me, let's get into it. OpenAI says that internal evaluations suggest an unreleased model may be able to independently find and carry out attacks against well-defended computer systems. The company said Friday that it suspended internal development of Astra. Astra had crossed what OpenAI calls the critical level in its preparedness framework. That is the top tier on the company's own scale for dangerous capabilities. So did Astra actually prove that it can break into protected systems on its own? The public record can't answer that. OpenAI defined the test, ran the test, graded the result, and controls all the evidence. No outside evaluator has verified what Astra did or what qualified it for that rating in the first place. OpenAI described the pause as its safeguards working as intended. The company said that Astra was never released and never handed to outside testers. It also said that Astra was not the model behind the recent Hugging Face token exposure that we have been covering and that has circulated among security researchers. Holding back the model may reduce the immediate risk, but it also keeps the strongest defensive capability inside the same lab, making the danger assessment itself. The skill runs both ways. Think of a locksmith who can spot the weak pin inside a lock. That knowledge can just open the door for thievery, or it can tell you exactly which part needs replacing. A model that finds and chains software flaws can attack a system, point the same ability at defense, and it can find those flaws before the attacker does. Independent researchers at Black Hat gave us the harder piece of evidence here. They warned that offensive AI is advancing faster than the defensive systems meant to contain it. Their concern doesn't depend on accepting OpenAI's private score. The podcast covered 2 Black Hat findings just Thursday. OpenAI agents had coordinated through a hidden message board, yet genuinely new exploit chains still needed human insight. Astra's reported result would cross that remaining line. OpenAI hasn't given outsiders enough evidence to know whether it did. The urgent window is the gap between offensive discovery and widespread defensive deployment. And restricted access, like Project Glasswing, for example, stretches that window. A few selected organizations can harden themselves first, while everyone else remains exposed to the same class of attack. However, pausing one model does not erase the discovery that such a model can even be built. The design knowledge, the research methods, and the underlying capability will spread beyond any single company's release calendar. So OpenAI's pause might buy time. The danger is it might buy time for attackers as well. So the useful question is what happens during this time. If defensive systems like this become broadly available, open, independently tested, and they are indeed able to patch flaws at machine speed, then the capability that unsettled OpenAI security team could become the foundation of a far stronger public defense. All right, now that same pattern has appeared now in biology. A generative system crossed a threshold, and the screen guarding the door turned out to recognize yesterday's visitors. Researchers at Stanford and the Arc Institute worked with the EVO2 genome model to design complete bacteriophage genomes from scratch. Now, a bacteriophage, usually shortened to just phage, is a virus that infects bacteria. 16 of the designs became working viruses in the lab. They infected and killed their E. coli targets. Now, there's no evidence that they attack people, and the researchers did the work under containment. So what's actually changed here? Well, back in February, we covered here on the Century Report what researchers described as the first functional virus created with AI. That showed the idea could work once. This new science paper, dated on August 6th, turns that first result into a repeatable process across 16 different designs. None of these genomes exactly matches a known natural sequence. They describe viruses that have never existed before. And that creates, of course, a very specific security gap. Companies that print synthetic DNA are supposed to check orders against databases of known dangerous organisms. Picture an airport watch list. As imperfect as they are, they can catch known faces or, unfortunately, someone who looks similar. A genome written from first principles, though, arrives with no matching photograph at all, so of course it goes right through. The current screening system was built to catch copies and close relatives of natural pathogens. It remains voluntary and resemblance does most of the work. A companion editorial argued that the governance needed for designed genomes simply doesn't exist yet. But this same advance also brings a fix to that as well. A model that learns what a new genetic sequence will do can help a screen judge function instead of searching for just a familiar pattern. The writer can become the reader, in other words. And that reaches far beyond security. Antibiotic resistance kills more people each year, and phage therapy offers a way to target bacteria that ordinary antibiotics simply don't stop anymore. Researchers could design a phage for a particular resistant infection instead of having to search nature and hoping the right one already exists somewhere out there. Creation and detection now depend on the same deeper ability, reading the language of life well enough to understand what a new sentence will do. We've found the gap early and under containment, while the same science needed to repair it is already in hand. All right, now let's move from biological instructions to the instructions running through the web. For about 30 years, websites could assume each visitor was a person with eyes, a browser, and eventually a credit card. An agent breaks those assumptions. It doesn't watch an ad, it doesn't admire a landing page, or patiently click through 6 different checkout screens. So how does the web serve a visitor that wants to act rather than look? In 2 days, several companies started building the answer. Cloudflare shipped Kitesurf, a browser that was made for AI agents specifically. It lets a site recognize an agent and negotiate identity, permission, and payment instead of blindly blocking it or pretending that it's human. Cloudflare also released the code for Cloudflare OS, its internal agent workspace, on GitHub. Now, Cloudflare sits at the edge of a large share of the internet, so the choices that it makes can very quickly become everybody else's default. Agent Plugins was published as an open standard for packaging an agent's connections and abilities so that they can travel across compatible assistant and coding platforms. Now, Vercel started that proposal, but OpenAI, Microsoft, Amazon, Vercel, and cursor maker Anysphere all sit on its steering group. Now, smaller companies are building higher up the same stack. Naive raised $28.5 million for agents that can incorporate and run companies. Hark launched a computer use agent that can take over web tasks. The fight right now is over the handshake. If one company owns the protocol that every agent needs to cross, that protocol becomes the private toll booth. An open handshake can be implemented by anyone. Each independent implementation makes it harder for one gatekeeper to enclose the route later. And there's genuine economic friction here too. Much of the web still gets paid by capturing human attention. Agents bring no attention to capture, and the shift also opens the web to people that its marketing funnels have never served very well. An agent can find a useful service, understand its terms, and complete the exchange directly. And the site succeeds because of what it can do with less dependence on how effectively it can hold someone's gaze. Now, announcements won't decide which version wins. Adoption will. The more quickly that open agent standards spread, the more likely this new layer belongs to everyone who uses it rather than a private toll booth. So for those of you out there building, use the open standards. All right, the agentic web may feel weightless. Its physical foundation, though, lands on actual land and draws from local grids and depends on communities that don't always have equal power to refuse it when it comes knocking on their door. Little Rock, North Nashville, and Emporia are now asking the same question. Who gets the benefit, who carries the cost, and who gets heard before construction begins? Around Little Rock, Google is building a $1 billion campus across 384 acres at the port. And 10 miles south, Avio has proposed a separate $6 billion project in Wrightsville. Wrightsville is a predominantly black, working-class town shaped by redlining. Much of the land is heir property, passed through families without a clear title. That can leave owners with weaker standing when they contest development or seek compensation. Avio's first phase would draw 150 megawatts, roughly enough to power 100,000 homes while providing 70 permanent jobs. A later phase could reach 1 gigawatt and use 4 million gallons of water each day. Now, that water figure does need context. Agriculture can move far more water across a region. A paper mill or an almond orchard drawing from the same source should face the same scrutiny. The sharper question, though, is whether one concentrated project strains this particular community's supply while sending most of the benefit elsewhere. And the rest of the arithmetic raises that concern. Arkansas's industrial power costs between 5 and 7 cents per kilowatt hour against a national average near 9 cents. And a 2023 state law prevents towns from banning these campuses outright. Opponents have described the pattern as appropriating rural Black-owned land. Pew found that 3/4 of planned U.S. data centers are headed towards southern and midwestern communities like these. If a powerful suburb blocks a project, the demand doesn't vanish. It often moves to a place with thinner budgets, weaker titles, and fewer lawyers. Now, Fisk University is testing a different arrangement. The historically black university is under financial strain, and its $900 million Quantum Leap plan would place an innovation center and the data center directly on its North Nashville campus. The idea is to capture some of the upside instead of merely hosting the load. Still, roughly 18,000 people signed a petition against the plan. One organizer asked, "Who pays if the AI bubble bursts?" Without a transparent process, those poised to hold some of the greatest risks are our schools, educators, students, and knowledge economy. Nashville's Metro Council has now imposed a moratorium through December and banned campuses larger than 500,000 square feet. That gives the community time and leverage to test the deal before committing to it. And then there's Emporia, Kansas. A proposed 1-gigawatt campus would cover 1,000 acres of prairie. After death threats over the project, the city moved its August commission meetings online and ended in-person public comment, citing safety. Police had already arrested one resident for clapping during a July data center meeting. That resident's complaint was really precise, though. The problem was losing public comment, regardless of whether the meeting happened by video or not. Threats need a response. Closing the channel ordinary residents use to question a billion-dollar development gives the most extreme voices the power to silence everyone else. The compute build-out is necessary. So are enforceable ways to keep its costs from landing on the people least able to reject them. Each community fight now leaves behind something that the next town can use: a size cap, a moratorium, a petition, or an order that bills developers directly for the infrastructure that they require. And we've seen that happening in other stories here. The hope is that it happens in these places as well. The old assumption has always been that these loads could follow the cheapest power and the weakest resistance. But that route is getting harder to use without public scrutiny. All right, our final story moves from communities paying for infrastructure to a public health system asking what kind of treatment it wants to pay for. 60 adults in England had lived with major depression for an average of 2 decades. Each had already tried at least 2 antidepressants without getting well. Could it be that one supervised dose of a new drug will change that? England's National Health Service designed, funded, and ran its first psilocybin trial to find out. The study published in Nature Medicine compared a single 25 milligram dose with an inert placebo. Both of the groups received the same preparation, the support during dosing, and the therapy afterward to help them process the experience. At 3 weeks, the psilocybin group had improved by about 10 points more on the standard depression scale. By 6 weeks, the group was at nearly 13 points. Half the group met the threshold for a substantial clinical response. At week 3, 40% reached remission on the clinician-rated depression scale, meaning that their systems fell below the clinical cutoff. The placebo remission rate was 3%, and participants also tolerated the treatment well. Those results are striking, but the study still carries an important limit. The trial was designed so that neither participants nor evaluators were supposed to know who received the drug, but that blinding collapsed. Every participant who received psilocybin guessed correctly, along with 70% of those who received the placebo. Now, psychedelics can produce unmistakable effects, as what happened here. Expectations can therefore change about how people report their symptoms, and the researchers did say that strong effect of this drug probably explains at least part of the difference between the groups. And this was also just a single-site feasibility study. Its job was to show that the National Health Service could recruit patients and keep them in the study and deliver the treatment and measure the outcome. A larger trial still has to actually confirm the benefit here. The most important shift in all of this may be who asked the question itself. A drug company usually needs evidence that can support regulatory approval and sales. A public health service needs to know whether it can deliver the treatment to people already under its care. A single supervised dose, followed by therapy, sits on a very different balance sheet from medication managed every day for years. A treatment that ends is less valuable to a seller than the treatment that continues indefinitely. So this can be far more valuable to the system or the patient who is paying for that lifelong care. The National Health Service has now begun producing the evidence itself, with the failed blinding stated plainly inside that result. A 2-year follow-up of these same participants is already underway. All right, so what does building defense mean in this new era? OpenAI can pause Astra, but one lab cannot carry the whole answer. Cyber defense gets stronger when the ability to find flaws reaches every system that needs protection. The same is true in biology. A database of known threats cannot catch every genome that has never existed. The model that writes new genetic sequences can also teach the screen to understand what they do. On the agentic web, defense means keeping the handshake open before a private toll booth becomes the default. Around data centers, it means giving communities binding power over costs, land, and public review. And in medicine, it means letting a public health system generate evidence for treatments that may reduce the long-term burden. Across all 5 stories, the old protections are meeting capabilities they were not designed to handle. Now, that doesn't leave us defenseless. It shows us where the defense has to change. The strongest version of this will be one that is widely available, independently checked, and actually shaped by the people who live with its consequences. We already have the intelligence needed to build it. The hopeful part is that more of that work is moving into the open, where many hands can make it stronger. See you tomorrow.